We're live.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the meeting of Merton Council's Cabinet of 18th of January 2021. Happy New Year to everybody, and let's hope that 2021 is a lot better for most of the people of Merton and for ourselves than 2020 may have been. First of all, I will just say that I'm intending to take the items on the agenda in a slightly different order. So I'll be taking items 5 and 6 together, and I'll also be taking item 9 at the end of the meeting. There are also some agenda items on the meeting tonight that do include confidential information, and I would ask that Cabinet members don't refer to the confidential information. If we don't, then we can carry on the meeting as usual. But if we do need to refer to those confidential items, we will have to exclude the public from the meeting. Obviously, I don't want that to happen, so please everyone bear that in mind. I'm going to go through the agenda. First of all, item 1, apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Natasha Irons, and just want to say, first of all, we all wish Natasha very well. I'm pleased to say that due to changes in policy enacted by this administration, we're about to see our very first Cabinet member going on maternity leave, and our very first interim Cabinet member. I look forward to making further announcements at the appropriate time, but this is a fantastic milestone for the council and shows our real commitment to having a family-friendly council. Merton is already a great place for families, and it's brilliant that we are doing this. So that's apologies. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Byers, you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a declaration of a non-pecuniary interest in respect of item 9, which is the exemption report for Public Health Commission services, because I have fairly recently been appointed chair of Age UK Merton, who are one of the contractees. So I will be recusing myself for that item. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's great news for you and for them, I hope. But I'm sorry that you won't be with us for that part of the meeting. We'll move that to the end so that you can attend up until that point. Then we move on to, if there are no others, we've agreed item 2. So item 3 is to agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 7th of December 2020. I can't see anybody not agreeing to them. Shall we take those as agreed? There's no dissent, so that's taken as agreed. Okay, so the first full item on the agenda for us is item 4, which is a very important item for us, which is the climate change delivery plan. And I'd like to welcome to introduce it Merton's first Cabinet member to have the climate emergency in his title. Councillor Martin Wilson, do you want to speak to this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to speak on this item, and I formally move the recommendations. One of the commitments in Merton's Climate Strategy and Action Plan was the formation of a delivery plan which is updated annually and is able to monitor progress. The first part of this report sets the scope of the plan, which covers major activities that the council intends to do to support emissions reduction within the borough and within the council buildings and services in 2021. The report in the second part considers the council progress in meeting its part in Merton's climate strategy and action plan in relation to the pace and scale of change needed by using indicators to serve as a baseline for future comparison. The strategy also factors into account to assess the likelihood of meeting the net zero targets. As a council, we have set out 8 work streams within the council. They cover all areas and actions are benchmarked against progress needed to be in keeping with our net zero target setting. They are set out as follows. Workstream 1 encourages consumers to reduce their carbon footprint through the purchase of local and sustainable goods and services. preventing waste and reusing recycling where possible, but also businesses to provide local and sustainable products, minimise waste, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from supply chains, and provide clear information to customers about sustainable products. Workstream 2 looks at the retrofit of homes, businesses and non-residential building stock with energy efficiency measures in existing homes and non-residential buildings across the borough, but also for homeowners and landlords to install locally powered, renewable energy and low carbon heating. Workstream 3 looks to enable all new developments and London Borough of Merton regenerated public spaces in Merton to be zero carbon without expensive retrofit by 2025. Workstream 4 encourages consumers to decrease the number of petrol and diesel vehicles by moving to more active forms of travel, including walking and cycling, but also more sustainable forms of travel, including walking and cycling. As a council, we are developing walking, cycling and electric vehicle infrastructure. Later on this evening, we will be discussing emissions-based levy parking charges, which is to encourage people to move to more sustainable forms of public transport and to improve air quality. Workstream 5 looks at green infrastructure, which includes increased tree cover on appropriate public land, in keeping with our open spaces strategy. This includes community planting. We will later on this year be bringing forward our tree strategy, which will include planting more trees across the borough. Workstream 6 looks at measures that the council will take internally to decarbonise buildings and schools by 2030. It will also include steps we will take to support the major decarbonisation transitions in energy, transport and the economy, but also as well decarbonise the London Borough of Merton's own fleet, including our waste collection vehicles by 2030. Workstream 7, London Borough of Merton procurements and investments, reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with goods and services procured by the London Borough of Merton on behalf of our residents, but also as well reduce gas emissions associated with our investments, such as carbon fossil fuels. Workstream 8, communication, outreach and corporate procedures, ensuring that our staff and councillors understand how to consider climate change in their work areas and feel empowered to act. Ensure effective communication of climate messages reach all residents, businesses and organisations in Merton, especially in the eastern borough, but also as well ensure that residents, businesses and organisations feel empowered to act to reduce emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. The main focus of year one is to set firm foundations from which actions can grow both within the council and within the borough. Where action to reduce carbon emissions already occurring, the plan seeks to accelerate action in keeping with the scale of change that is needed to meet our carbon reduction commitments. Examples where accelerated action has already taken place since the declaration of a climate emergency includes securing 100% renewable electricity tariff for the council, but also as well the introduction of 26 school streets in the borough, which took place in the autumn. We are also currently consulting on Merton's local plan, where key policies have been reviewed based on emerging evidence to support a net zero carbon borough. The delivery plan commits to investigate options for taking stronger action and gain additional resource through lobbying or application for external funding. An example is our commitment to considering options to reduce emissions from existing and future procured services. Because delivery of our net zero targets is so dependent on the action of others, the plan seeks to significantly ramp up engagement through a comprehensive communication plan and the formation of a community-based climate action group. And we'll be having our first meeting next week with over 100 people having already signed up for it. The delivery plan operates under the long-term framework of Merton's Climate Strategy and Action Plan, which my colleague, Councillor Tobin Byers, led on when he had responsibility for this area, and used the extensive consultation and evidence review that was undertaken through its development in 2019 and 2020. Whilst the net zero targets may take decades to achieve, the delivery plan aims to operate within a single year, enabling delivery to be responsive to the many changes in funding, policy, innovation and markets. It is expected that priority action areas set out in the delivery plan will be complete by December 2021, with the plan reviewed and updated on an annual basis. It also acknowledges funding gaps that the Council is not expected to fill but will be needed by others to meet the 2050 net zero target. These include the additional capital costs to support low carbon retrofit of Merton's homes and non-residential buildings. Finding resources will be challenging given the current financial climate, but essential if we are to meet the targets in the action plan. Finally, I would also like to take the opportunity of thanking Katie Halter and Dominique Hill for all their work in bringing this action plan and delivery plan together. The time for talking is over. Now is the time to take concrete steps to deliver this ambitious strategy going forward, and I look forward to its implementation over the next years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. That's very clear about the importance of this strategy. The lead officer for this item is Chris Lee, the Director of Environment and Regeneration. Chris, did you have anything that you would like to add to Councillor Wilson's introduction?
No, that's very comprehensive. Nothing to add, Chair.
Fantastic. Okay, I should have actually, I've just forgotten, I should have said at the beginning of the meeting that there are several other councillors also at the meeting today from across the parties, and I think that illustrates the cross-party nature of a lot of the work that's been going on here. So I'll just name check some of the councillors who are attending. First of all, there's Councillor McLean, who's the leader of the opposition, Councillor Fairclough, who's leader of the minority Lib Dem Party, Councillor Southgate, who's leader of the Merton Park Independence Party, Councillors Holden, Gretton and Mundy are also here. But anyway, on this item, and know that there are a few other Cabinet members who wish to say something about the importance to their area of responsibility. So would it be okay to take Councillor Lanning first?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to congratulate Councillor Welton and officers on what is a very ambitious plan to tackle climate change and reduce emissions. And I think it's particularly timely that it precedes one of our tangible actions to do so. We know that climate change is increasingly recognised as a public health emergency, and in Merton we have long been taking steps to ensure that these objectives aren't seen in isolation, but they're also deeply embedded in our approach to health and care. For instance, Chris, as Director of Environment and Regeneration, plays a really active role on our Health and Wellbeing Board, where next week we'll be discussing with our NHS and voluntary sector partners how, as a collective, we can support the delivery of our climate objectives across the borough. So I'm really glad to see it here tonight. Thank you, Chair.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Lanning. I also saw that Councillor Byers wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I firstly say how much I welcome the next stage of the Climate Emergency Action Plan, this delivery phase. I think we've achieved a huge amount since the declaration of a climate emergency at July Council in 2018. And I think that's a real testament to everybody who's been involved in that. And I'd particularly place on record my thanks to all of those who were part of the Climate Emergency Working Group, to Councillor Welton for his leadership on this since the autumn, and particularly to Katie and Dominique, the climate officers who Councillor Welton also thanked. I wanted to particularly emphasise the importance of cross-party work on this measure, Chair. When I first spoke to leaders of the other parties in 2018 when we were looking at the motion, I was really pleased that all four group leaders at the time agreed to put their name to that motion, and that the motion subsequently received unanimous cross-party support. And I was equally delighted with the involvement of councillors during the development of the plan itself. Both Councillors Holden from the Conservative group and Gould from the Liberal Democrat group sat on the Climate Emergency Working Group and contributed a huge amount to the development of the plan. And a number of other councillors have also been involved. Councillor Southgate, who you mentioned is present this evening, attended our stakeholder workshop last February, and I know has kept a very close eye on the development of the plan. And I would really urge all councillors to continue to engage in the next phase of the climate emergency action plan as collaboratively and constructively as they did the previous phase, as we move from the development of the plan to its delivery. We know, as Councillor Welton has outlined, that in order to get to net zero, it is going to require some difficult decisions, and that we all have a leadership role in working with our communities to encourage the behaviour change that we know will be necessary to meeting these net zero targets. So I would hope that councillors from across the political spectrum would continue to work closely with us, whether that's policies such as emissions-based charging or indeed any others, because without these measures and without that cross-party collaboration, we will ultimately not succeed in meeting our net zero targets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Byers, can I just also use this opportunity to thank you for your involvement at the outset of getting the climate emergency higher up the agenda on the council. It's very much appreciated, and I know that you've set us on the right direction, which Councillor Wilson has really allowed to lift off with. Now, next, I know that Councillor Marcy Skeet wanted to say something, but I think she's having some difficulties getting through on the call. Marcy, are you able to join us and say something? I think I'm going to have to take that as a no for now. I don't know if anyone from Democratic Services is able to try and help Councillor Skeet get onto the call. I also had Councillor Ellie Stringer wanted to say something, so if she comes in first, and if there's a chance for Councillor Skeet to then come in, we'll come back to her. So, Councillor Stringer, do you want to join in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone involved in this climate change work so far. It's ambitious and challenging, but it is and should be an urgent priority for us. And one group whose voice often isn't heard is that of children and young people of Merton, and I'm really glad that young people's voices have been involved in this work, and I'd like to thank the officers for working to involve them. It's clear from my involvement with Merton's children and young people that tackling climate change is an issue of major urgency for them. And the reason why it is and should be a priority for our children is for many reasons. For a start, where it overlaps with tackling air quality, such as on the item we're going to be discussing next, we know the ill effects that exposure to poor air quality can have on children's health and physical development. And so we have to be using all the levers we can to address this. And children are the adults of the future. And so we should be doing everything that we can do now to ensure that the world that they inherit is not facing a climate emergency. And so everything that Merton can do to play its role, it should be doing. And apologies for the slightly cheesy line, but it's true. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. I think in 2021, everyone's allowed a bit of cheese, aren't we? So thank you for that. Councillor Skeet, have you been able to get into the meeting?
Yes.
Aha, there you go.
I had to switch devices.
Very good. Do you want to have your say now?
Oh, yes, I can. Thank you.
Brilliant.
I am very concerned about the impact of climate change and carbon emissions on a variety of groups with protected characteristics. These include those with disabilities and long-term illnesses, children and pregnant women, as well as older people. There is also evidence that harm from emissions disproportionately impact people from ethnic minorities. Therefore, I want Cabinet to be aware that the Council's proposals on tackling the climate emergency will have a very important step for promoting equalities. I am supporting the administration's work on this issue, and I hope that anyone who professes to support equalities will also do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Skeet. It's a very important point about the impact on people from less fortunate backgrounds that climate change will have and emissions will have. I think it's very well worth making. I didn't have any further speakers from the Cabinet, so shall we just move to the recommendations? The whole issue of climate change is obviously very sobering, but I think that the council has shown that it's a high priority and that there's a strong sense of cross-party commitment to deal with this issue that's very important to us. And I hope that we can maintain that. It's very important that we maintain that. If we're all agreed, we'll vote on recommendations A and B. Is everybody happy with that? I see no dissent. So we agree to recommendations A and B. Very good. So now we move to item 5 and 6, which are both on the emissions-based parking proposals. First of all, what I'd like to do is listen to the thoughts of those members of scrutiny at the council. So first of all, we'll deal with the reference from the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny Panel, which is chaired by Councillor Aidan Mundy. So Councillor Mundy, would you like to speak first? Also, I should just say as well that the external speakers have a maximum of 3 minutes, and we'll notify you when that's up. So Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Leader, for the opportunity to speak on this policy proposal that has the potential of improving the life chances of all our residents. So echoing the previous points made by Councillor Skates, Stringer and others. As a cross-party panel, it's important to recognise the efforts Labour, Conservative and Lib Dem colleagues made in contributing to these discussions. I want to pay particular attention to the Lib Dems for their support of the policy in its infancy and welcome further suggestions from their leader later on to improve it, as you'll no doubt hear. It's important to make the point also that at national level, the government is exploring but have yet to implement any form of emissions-based road charging, and therefore councils of all political persuasions are taking action in this area. Briefly, I want to draw attention to 3 areas of the report and from our meeting in December. So this policy is new, but it is evidence-led, and we know behaviour is influenced by price. Those with electric or low emitting vehicles will be rewarded with a discount, and those driving polluting vehicles will pay a premium. At the higher end, this will cost less than a cup of coffee a day. I also note that the scheme has been adapted slightly since it has come to scrutiny to further support those residents, particularly those in need. Very much welcome that. Second, the panel noted the large extent of user engagement and the feedback during the consultation, and our recommendation supports it continuing, taking the best learning from across other boroughs and implementing it. Third and final point I'd like to make is on maintaining high levels of communication. We saw that during the consultation. We had a recommendation that didn't unfortunately make its way through. That being said, the panel was very supportive of keeping residents informed. And if it's not already in the implementation plan, I would request where possible, all residents currently with a permit are written to and showcase the benefits of this scheme, what we're trying to do as a council, since we've got the cross-party support, and also the support available as outlined. Finally, I just want to thank the cabinet members that attended, the resident association to give their time to give their evidence, and Chris Lee and his team for the constructive and responsive way they approached our questioning. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Mundy. There's a number of points there that we'll obviously have to be taking on board during the course of our discussions. Also wanted to call Councillor Anthony Fairclough, who's the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party in Merton. Anthony, are you there?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much.
Sorry, just before you speak, Councillor Skeet, if you can mute yourself, you're making a lot of noise in the background. I don't want to put anyone off.
I have a 5-year-old at home, Chair. I'm used to background noise.
You don't have to hear ours though whilst you're speaking. So anyway, Councillor Fairclough, it's over to you for your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. As part of your consideration tonight of the reference from scrutiny, I'm hoping that you'll commit to considering further changes either now or possibly in the future. As I think we're probably all agreed, in so many areas of public policy, engagement with the public and their consent is needed to ensure that the desired outcomes are achieved. And simply residents have to see and understand a proposal and be brought along with it. So tonight I want to highlight areas where we think these proposals work against that. Emissions-based charges should certainly be part of the toolbox to encourage vehicles less to switch to greener vehicles, or possibly to give up their vehicles entirely. But we've consistently pushed the administration for evidence on the specific decisions taken in this area. We think the policy is deficient in the following ways. The question of off-street parking and through traffic, the targeting of Wimbledon Rains Park, and visitors permits, and the way that these proposals handle those. Taken together, we fear that these issues strike at the heart of the proposals and reduce public trust, and potentially make it look like a revenue-raising policy. And it undermines public support for the whole climate emergency response. An example might be seen on page 52 of the supplementary agenda, where, after reading these proposals, only 35% of disabled respondents agreed with the somewhat innocuous idea that Merton Council should encourage motorists towards more sustainable and active modes of transport, such as walking and cycling. Looking at on-street parking and through traffic, something like 70% of the borough is not subject to CPZ, and even in those areas that are, broadly speaking, larger houses have off-street parking and so are exempt. Basically, if you're rich enough, you can buy your way out. And pollution comes from driven vehicles, but through traffic is unaffected, and this questions the fairness of the proposals. One possible remedy to this is to ensure transparency in what the extra cash raised can be used for. Spending on climate emergency response and air quality would make it feel like a joined up plan, committing to definitely spend it on those, like I proposed at scrutiny. Turning to the second issue, there's still no real evidence that the 2019 proposals, the earlier proposals, worked as intended, whereas these new proposals bake in the errors in that scheme by keeping and building on the higher charges that Wimbledon and Rains Park is subject to. If we're switching to a polluter pays principle, then we should be looking at how environmentally friendly a vehicle is and how often it's used, and not where it's parked. There's a host of ways to tweak the effectiveness of the scheme and improve confidence that isn't just about raising cash, from discounts for low mileage to longer lead-in times to allow people more time to change vehicles if they can. Turning to visitors permits, at scrutiny we discussed the limits of the equality impact assessment. I'm pleased to see that that's been updated even further, and I thank officers for that. However, there's still no demographic analysis of who purchases visitor permits or scratch cards, and no proxy for that. We don't know whether those with certain protected characteristics buy more of these permits.
3 minutes, Chair.
May I finish my paragraph, Chair? Is that okay?
When you have a few more seconds to polish off.
Thank you. Frankly, the logic of the proposal around visitor permits stings. Telling visitors to come by public transport or more environmentally friendly cars isn't really something we can do. We can't even see theoretically how it's supposed to work, and that's just going to undermine trust. I would urge you to reflect on these points during your debate. Thank you.
Okay, I'll allow you that extra time because of the background noise at the beginning, but next time. Anyway, so in order for us to come to Cabinet's response and the way that we've responded to the scrutiny's report, I think it makes sense if, first of all, ask Councillor Rebecca Lanning to come in as the Cabinet member responsible for public health. Do you wish to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Can I first take this opportunity to thank Chris, Kath, Ben, Louisa and the wider team for their work on our proposed approach to emissions-based charging. It's been quite rightly a long process to ensure that the model that has been developed is designed to meet its objectives, namely to tackle air quality, climate change, and also to encourage sustainable challenge. I also want to extend my thanks to all those who responded to the consultation, the Sustainable Communities Panel and Councillor Mundy as chair, who has spoken to the reference back to Cabinet, and the important amendments to the policy which have been incorporated in this iteration, which I know Councillor Welton will discuss shortly. Chair, this proposal is particularly timely, especially following our decision to tackle climate change, as our approach to reducing emissions in the borough forms an important part of that. I think as a council, we're all in agreement that improving air quality is a shared objective, recognising that it is the biggest environmental threat to health in the UK. We have between 28,000 and 36,000 deaths a year attributed to long-term exposure, so we have to take active steps to tackle it. We do have limited levers as a local authority to influence air quality, but what we do know is that road traffic emissions are the biggest cause of air pollution, and they cause and exacerbate asthma, lung and heart disease. We also know that the ULEZ has helped to reduce the number of polluting vehicles in central London by 17,400 every day, and air pollution overall by 40%. So it's only right that we build on this evidence in Merton and use all the powers available to us to tackle toxic air, by also continuing to fulfill the actions in our air quality action plan, of which emissions-based charging was a key element. The emissions-based charging proposal that you have before you aligns to the government's polluter pays principle. It builds on the Treasury's vehicle excise duty call for evidence from last year, which states, and I quote, "the greater share of the tax burden should fall on those who purchase the most polluting cars." And it also recognises the government's plan to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars within the next 10 years. By abolishing the diesel levy surcharge in this plan, we're establishing a fairer model to parking charges, whereby half of existing residential permits will see their charges either reduce or remain the same. It will only be the most polluting vehicles in bands H and above that see a price increase. And recognising that hard factors, namely pricing mechanisms, are key tools to affect behaviour change, the policy seeks to deliver against our objectives to improve air quality, but that's also in combination with the other measures that we're implementing, including low traffic neighbourhoods and school streets. It seeks to do this by encouraging users to either consider a lower polluting vehicle, choose more sustainable and healthy modes of transport such as walking and cycling, or for occasional car users, as referenced by Councillor Fairclough, opting to use, for example, one of the 60 car clubs that are available in Merton. This policy can only be successful by changing behaviour, by seeing a reduction in the number of cars in higher polluting bands and an increase in lower polluting bands, and the number of permits being given up overall. We're confident in our approach based on the success of the same pricing mechanism model which was used by with the diesel levy and also the Central London ULEZ, but it will be critical to continue to monitor the policy, as Councillor Mundy highlighted, to make sure that it meets the objectives of improving air quality and encouraging sustainable travel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lanning. That's very helpful, explaining the public health impact of the proposals. We also had the cabinet member for climate change who wished to speak as well, Councillor Martin Walton.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to reiterate Councillor Lanning's comments in relation to the work of officers Chris Lee, Ben Stevens, Louisa Green, and everyone else involved in terms of this consultation. It's probably fair to say that it's been a very extensive consultation. As a council, we have received 1,600 responses from across the borough, which equates to approximately 2% of car owners, with 96% of respondents to the survey being car owners, which is far higher than the 68% of boroughs that own a vehicle. It has to be said that it has created a lot of interest, but it is my view that these proposals will be of benefit to the borough. You know, if we are to take the climate emergency seriously, then we do need to take tough measures. In terms of the report, a majority of respondents agreed with the overarching objectives of the proposal, with 2/3 agreeing with the statement that Merton has a key role to play in tackling the challenges to air quality and climate change we are facing. More than half agreed that Merton Council should encourage motorists towards more sustainable and active modes of transport, such as walking and cycling, which contributes to improved air quality and public health. I'd also like to mention the response from Transport for London, which was supportive and welcomed the approach proposed, and in particular the recognition that the appropriate management of car parking can have wider benefits in terms of mode shift, reduced air quality and carbon emissions and public health. They supported the proposal to replace the diesel levy with a surcharge based on the ULEZ scheme, which has the benefit of using a pre-existing standard, making it more understandable to the public. They supported the proposal and they believe it is appropriate given the significant impacts private vehicles can have, particularly those with high emissions travelling through relatively densely populated urban areas. Whilst the minority in terms of the respondents did think it wouldn't change their behaviour, it is worth noting that if these percentages are realised across all CPZs, it could have a significant transport impact. For example, only 5% of respondents said they would consider getting rid of a vehicle. But if we look at this across the borough, that would equate to 1,000 vehicles. 15% said they would be likely to consider a lower emission vehicles, 10% a fully electric vehicle, and 13% said they would be likely to increase their use of sustainable modes. We hope that these proposals leads to a step change in behaviour. Respondents were also asked about the importance of measures to support sustainable transport choices, and the largest proportion felt that better public transport was important at 84%, followed by pedestrian facilities at 74%. 62% of respondents also felt that both cycle routes and cycle parking facilities were important. Slightly more than half thought that the more electric vehicle charging points were important to have, and as a borough we have introduced them across the borough, and we will be introducing more in the next year. The primary objective of these proposals is to set pricing signals that incentivise residents to reduce their use and ownership of cars or to consider switching to a lower emission model. It should be noted that as the proposals achieve these objectives and residents change their travel choices, the income from parking permits is projected to decrease. In terms of the revenue which comes from these proposals, we can only spend the money received from parking charges as set out in the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984, which directs that income cannot be used for general council expenditure and only allows authorities to spend surplus income on the day-to-day management of the parking service, public passenger transport services, local road improvement projects, carriage and footway maintenance, and environmental related expenditure. Surpluses from parking activities are currently used to contribute towards the Freedom Pass concessionary travel scheme for Merton residents. Additional surplus generated by those proposals could potentially be reinvested directly into measure to support complementary sustainable transport measures, thus further contributing towards the council objectives. All of this is published in full on our website, as we are transparent in terms of how this money is spent. We have set the charge at such level which will disincentivise car ownership and use and encourage the consideration of lower emission vehicles. According to data from the RAC Foundation, the costs of motoring over the last decade have reduced in relation to both the cost of living and average wages. This is in comparison to public transport costs, which have increased. This is likely to have incentivised car use, and the proposals aim to mitigate this against this at a local level. In response to feedback, the proposed prices for annual residence permits for the middle bands, G and H, have slightly been reduced by £5 and £20 respectively. This change means that approximately 50% of the least polluting vehicles will not pay a higher charge. Some newer diesel vehicles will become exempt from paying the additional ULEZ surcharge of £150, although some older, more polluting petrol vehicles may also become liable for this charge. A number of responses question the timing of the proposal so soon after the recent increases in January 2020, and particularly with the COVID-19 crisis ongoing. A number of the responses received to the consultation of the previous parking charges scheme stated they felt that the parking charges would be fairer if they were based on the polluter pays principle, and more than half agreed that Merton Council should prioritise lower polluting vehicles by offering a lower parking charge over higher polluting vehicles. The introduction of the Ringo parking payment scheme in early 2020 has provided the technology which now makes it feasible for the council to introduce emissions-based parking charges. A large number of respondents also felt strongly that the proposals in relation to visitor e-permits and scratch cards were unfair and could have a detrimental impact on groups vulnerable to social isolation and digital exclusion that may be more reliant on visitors. Originally, there were no concessions to elderly groups in these proposals, but having taken into account the consultation responses, to mitigate this, the council proposes to provide a concession to those residents living in a CPZ that are over 75 and are registered on the council tax register as a single occupant and in receipt of council tax benefit. These residents will be entitled to a maximum of 12 visitor permits per year at a 50% discount for the CPZ they reside in. As Cabinet member responsible for this consultation, but also as lead member for the climate emergency, I ask that Cabinet support these proposals, as we need to have a step change in driver behaviour within the borough and take serious measures to tackle emission and improved air quality. I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking Scrutiny for all their work, and I reiterate the comments of Councillor Mundy made earlier, and I'd also like to thank Councillor Fairclough for his representations. I believe that these proposals are the right proposals going forward. We need to implement measures which will lead to a step change in behaviour, and I believe that these changes will. I endorse these proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Welton. And can I also thank you and Councillor Lanning for the incredible amount of hard work that you've put into this set of proposals. It's very evident that that you've taken on board a very wide range of views from residents and councillors, and I'd like to thank you for that. And there's a number of very interesting things that you've said about the significant effect that that price could have on owners, in that there is evidence that that they will move to lower emitting vehicles. Also that we've stated that if the policy works, our income is projected to fall. And I think that's worth noting. In response to the consultation, I've obviously made a number of changes here, but I wondered whether the lead officer for this issue, the Director of Environment and Regeneration, Chris Lee, is there. We've had quite a wide-ranging number of points that have been addressed here that have come to us from councillors and from residents. But I wondered whether there was anything that you would like to add, Chris, or any further points. And I may come back to you on a few others as well, because I've been approached by residents as well. Though I do think that most of the things have been addressed up until now. But Chris, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you're right, Chair. I think most of the points have been covered, but just to thank Scrutiny for their helpful contribution to the debate, which I think we've reflected in the amendments to the report. And I particularly acknowledge the point around keeping this under review, because I think that's absolutely necessary as we start to track the behaviour of motorists in the borough and the impact that these pricing changes have on air quality and carbon reduction. But also in an environment of policy change beyond the borough boundary that's changing. We read on Friday that Transport for London have got aspirations for a boundary charge to London, which will change some of the through traffic movement, we would hope, if that was introduced. So it's important that we both monitor the Merton impact, but also the wider policy and legislative changes that will inevitably start to be brought about in order to address this very important topic. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. And well, amongst the things that that I've been asked, so I should say that the Conservatives have sent out an email to a number of their supporters that's then been forwarded, encouraging them to forward concerns to me. And amongst those, there are a number of people who are suggesting that that this was unfair because it was charging them but not charging others. What powers do we have to charge people who don't happen to live in the controlled parking zones, or who don't happen to use the council's car parks? Do we have those powers, or do we need the government to give us those powers?
No, we don't have those powers. We don't have road user charging powers, nor do we have the power to introduce CPZs where they aren't petitioned. So we're seeking to utilise only the powers that we have, whilst pursuing those that we might wish to have.
So it's a good point, but we can't exceed the powers that we have. If the Conservatives would like us to go further, then they could encourage their friends in government to deal with that. Is that probably the position on that. Sorry, I'll use that as a rhetorical question, Chris, to cause any issues for you. Well, obviously, there was a bit of conflict between the two councillors who spoke. One said that this was evidence-led, and Councillor Fairclough said that it wasn't. So we have got a commitment to monitoring the evidence and involving scrutiny as this goes along. I think that's
that's absolutely correct, Chair.
Fantastic. I think quite a number of the respondents that approached me were really concerned simply about the pricing levels, in that they thought that it wouldn't change behaviour. I think that Councillor Welton has shown that there is some evidence that it would, and also they've said that it wasn't fair because it didn't help people who had the lower polluting cars. But I think that amongst the changes that we're making, what we'd be reaching would be a point where half of existing users, or roughly half of existing users, will either pay the same or less than they are now, which in real terms would be a price fall for half of vehicles. My understanding is that's how the proposals have been changed as a result of this consultation of residents. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Just over, I think it's 48.2% would pay less or the same amount.
Obviously, we're hoping that before very long, some of the people will fall into less polluting vehicles anyway by changing their vehicles. So about half. That's good to hear. And we have, as Councillor Welton said, proposed some measures to help residents from who are more vulnerable, older relatives living on their own who find it difficult to pay. So I just wanted Cabinet to note that in particular, that's a change from the original proposals as well. I didn't have anybody else down to speak, and I can't recall any further questions that haven't been answered or points that haven't been made out of those that Councillor Fairclough or the people who've written to me individually have asked. So on that basis, I'm going to move to the recommendations. So on item 5, agenda item 5, there's one recommendation. That's recommendation 1. Can we agree that, please?
Agreed.
I can't see any dissenters, so we'll agree that. And then on item 6, we have recommendations 1.1 to 1.8. Can we agree those? Again, I can't see any dissenters. I'd just like to, that's approved. Just like to thank everybody for their interest in this. I'd like to thank Councillors Fairclough and Mundy for coming to speak to us tonight and expressing their opinions. I hope that we've shown that we have taken on board a lot of the comments and thoughts that residents and councillors had, and hopefully we can move on. We clearly heard earlier in the meeting about the importance of tackling emissions and climate change more generally, and so I do welcome the cross-party collaboration that we've been doing on that. So we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, everyone. So item 7 is the heritage strategy, and to speak on that, Cabinet member is Councillor Caroline Cooper-Marbia. Caroline, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying thanks to Anthony Hopkins and other officers who've worked hard to bring this refreshed heritage strategy to completion. It was drawn up in collaboration with our heritage and voluntary sector partners, and I also like to express my appreciation to them for their support and cooperation. This is a refresh of the borough's heritage strategy to cover 5 years between 2021 to 2025. It provides a good overview of the borough's rich heritage and recent achievements. It sets out the aims and objectives of the council and its heritage and voluntary sector partners. As part of the work that went into completing the heritage, a wide-ranging public consultation was undertaken to gather views from the public. It is a pertinent time to be presenting the heritage strategy, considering the impact that COVID-19 is having on communities and on the heritage sector in general. Many organizations are already reporting significant challenges. For example, the borough recently lost a visitor attraction at Southside House to the current economic downturn. A number of achievements have happened since the last heritage strategy, including a large upturn in external investments into the borough's heritage assets, including major improvements to the Cannons and Merton Priory sites. Projects to digitize and improve the diversity of our collections has also been undertaken, and there are plans for more of this to be done using the new heritage strategy. With the tightening of council's funds, the team will continue to work creatively to draw investment in and work collaboratively across communities. The last section of the strategy outlines the key projects that the council and its partner aim to deliver over the next 5 years. A collaborative work plan will be drawn up with the partners once the strategy has been approved. It will form the basis for monitoring and delivering the strategy. And with this, I ask that Cabinet approve the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. That's fantastic. I also have at the meeting the officer responsible, Anthony Hopkins, who's the head of Library, Heritage and Adult Education Service, as well as if he has anything he would like to add, one of our favourite officers. Anthony, are you there? Did you want to say anything?
Oh, yeah, nothing to add from me. Thank you.
That is a shame, because I'd just like to say that in my early months as leader of the council, I've been very impressed with your department, and very proud to find out about the really amazing heritage that Merton has through your team. So please pass that on to everybody who works with you. It really is greatly appreciated. Now, I didn't have any cabinet members say that they wish to speak on this item, but other than praising Anthony Hopkins and his team, I think that we have to really get on to the recommendations, which are recommendations 1 and 2. Did everybody approve those? I see no dissent, so thank you to everyone involved. Those are approved. We'll move on to the next item, which is item 9, the public consultation on Merton's borough character and small sites. Councillor Martin Welton, you're the lead member on that. Would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I ask Cabinet to support the recommendations set out in this report for the 6 weeks consultation of the borough character study and small sites. The borough character study was started in March 2020 using funding from the GLA's Home Building Capacity Fund. Future Merton commissioned architects, Alley's and Morrison's urban practitioners to undertake a borough-wide characterisation study. The characterisation study will help support the local plan, which will assist in assessing future planning applications. The role of the study is to highlight Merton's unique socio-economic, environmental and physical characters and give design guidance to future development to enhance the borough's existing built environment character. The draft strategy sets out analysis on the character of each of the smaller areas within our borough, with guidance as to how new development could either repair, reinforce or reimagine the area. It is similar to the borough character study that was carried out for about 2/3 of Merton a few years back. We have also carried out extensive engagement with residents and other groups already as part of preparing the draft character study. This included a community network survey in July 2020 that engaged with a representative selection of community organisations that provide a space for local groups. The survey asked respondents to describe the role, use and reach that their venues had in their neighbourhoods. A 6-week online survey, which took place between September and October 2020, asked residents to comment on the perception of neighbourhood boundary lines. In addition, the survey also asked residents to rate their neighbourhoods on 8 topics: transport, environment, housing, economy, streets and space, traffic and parking, and safety. On small sites guidance, Merton is characterised by fragmented land ownership. Lots of people own small amounts of land, such as houses with underused land, brownfield sites and undeveloped rooftops. High land and property prices means assembling large sites is expensive. Small sites have the potential to provide steady and incremental growth within the borough. For the past 15 years, around 90% of planning applications which we receive have been for new homes on small sites. Small sites are crucial to providing much needed new homes, but can be challenging to design in established urban areas like Merton. Our draft Small Sites Toolkit sets out architectural and urban design principles specifically to address the opportunities and challenges of delivering small sites to improve the design quality across the whole borough. Feedback from the public engagement held in the summer of 2020 for the Housing Delivery Study, which received over 2,000 responses, highlighted that 61% thought that houses should be built on underused small sites, and that the top 3 priorities for future housing delivery are affordability, quality of design, and building sustainability. Other boroughs are undertaking similar exercises, with Croydon adopting their suburban design guide that focus on small site development. The Small Sites Toolkit consists of 3 tools to encourage applicants to have a design-led approach, featuring 5 main design principles: Made in Merton, character and strategy; high quality design, good design principles; putting people first, well-being; better streets, public realm and street experience; finally, economic and sustainable environment. It also includes design case studies and a template to guide applicants to produce projects more from a design perspective. The template asks a series of questions for applicants to answer and guide applications to provide visual justification for design decisions. I would like to take this opportunity of thanking all the team in Future Merton who have been involved in this to date. I ask Cabinet tonight to support the recommendations and ask you to endorse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and thank you for the time that you've put into this. Thank you also for praising the Future Merton team. I know the great deal of work that's gone into that, and I hope that can be recorded for tonight's meeting. The lead officer once again is Chris Lee, the Director of Environment and Regeneration. Chris, did you have anything further you'd like to add?
No, nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, thanks. That's fantastic. I didn't have any other cabinet members down to speak, but Councillor Welton outlined the importance of this this work that we're doing, and obviously outlined some of the key things that are important to the council, particularly around affordable housing and good quality housing for our residents. So, is everybody ready to move to the recommendations? Are we happy to accept recommendations A and B on this item? I see no dissenters, so those are approved. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item. Now, as I said at the beginning, we're going to skip item 9 and move that to the end of the meeting. Please somebody remind me that we've moved it to the end of the meeting before I close the meeting accidentally quickly. And so we'll move on to item 10, which is the business plan update. And actually, I should have said at the outset of the meeting, I think it would be a good idea to take that at the same time as item 11, which is the financial monitoring report. The lead member on both of those items is Councillor Tobin Byers. Would you like to introduce the item, Tobin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'll start with the financial monitoring report, if I may, and then move on to the business plan. I'd like to start by thanking Caroline Holland and Roger Kershaw and everyone in their teams for all of the work that goes into these reports. These are the reports that we produce on a monthly basis to keep track of our budgets. And I'd also like to thank all directors and their respective teams for the work that goes on in controlling their budgets in such challenging circumstances as we've seen this year. The report for month 8 shows an overall net adverse variance of 2.8 million, which is a reduction from the previous month, primarily due to the further tranche of the sales fees and charges monies that we've received from government being added. That overall position is made up of overspends in corporate services, community and housing, and environment and regen, and an underspend in children, schools and families. But within each of those departments, there are a wide array of both over and underspends, the vast majority of which have been caused by COVID. I wanted to make 3 points specifically in relation to COVID. Firstly, despite the additional tranche of funding that I've alluded to, the Council does remain with an overall net deficit of nearly £7.5 million as a result of the pandemic, as shown in the table on page 87. This is obviously a far cry from the pledge that was made to councils at the beginning of the pandemic, where the Community Secretary told us to do whatever it takes to look after our communities, and the government would fully recompense us for that. It's also worth noting that the forecast shows that had the pandemic not occurred, we would have actually posted a surplus for the year. The second point I wanted to make in respect of COVID is that this report reflects the second national lockdown that took place in November, but it doesn't take account of any of the subsequent changes that London went through when we moved very quickly from tiers 2 to 3 to 4, and then ultimately entered the third national lockdown at the beginning of this year. I would invite colleagues simply to read the narrative on page 94 in respect to leisure centres, and you'll readily appreciate how difficult it is to forecast the recovery in these areas, given the very fluid situation in respect of the ever-changing restrictions. And the third point I want to make flows directly from this, and that is to say that the overall position remains clouded in a lot of uncertainty. I think the Section 151 officer at a Budget Council a year or two ago referred to the fog of Brexit. And if that fog has in any way lifted, then it's certainly been replaced by the fog of COVID, because there is a huge amount of ongoing uncertainty, which makes it very difficult for us to forecast. We know that with some additional spend that we've seen in some service areas, there will remain an element of additional spend. So a good example would be the additional monies that we pay for our curbside collection, as people will continue to work at home to some degree or another. We know that the rate of recovery in other areas, I've already alluded to leisure centres, but parking is another good example, is very difficult to predict, and the report makes reference to work taking place in respect of that, but clearly that is very difficult to forecast. And we know that in some of our demand-led services, the pandemic might actually have suppressed some of the ordinary costs that we would be seeing, potentially artificially, which obviously makes it quite difficult to predict what the budgets will look like next year. All of this is made more challenging because the government, for understandable reasons, I think, decided not to give us a 3-year settlement, but just to give us a 1-year settlement. And at the spending review announced a number of one-off grants, all of which make it very difficult for us to forecast beyond the year. What is certain is that the impact of COVID will certainly continue into the next financial year. So I think it's absolutely vital that we, in conjunction with London councils and the LGA, continue to push the government to fully recompense local authorities for all of their work in response to the pandemic. I'll move on to the business plan, Chair, and I'd start by apologising for the very late publication of this. This was not because we were trying to be obstinate, this was because Caroline and her team were working on it right up until the last minute last week. And I want to just reiterate my thanks to Caroline and Roger and all of their teams for all of the work that has gone into this over the past month or so. It's probably just as well that we were very restricted with our activities over the Christmas break, because I suspect that Caroline was sat with her calculator eating her turkey and mince pie. I'd also like to thank all councillors for their flexibility in regards to the scrutiny arrangements for this year. Everything's had to shift around slightly due to the delayed announcements from late last year, which has meant that we've had to fit in an awful lot of scrutiny meetings at the beginning of this year. So I just wanted to thank all councillors for their cooperation with that. The primary reason that this business plan was delayed from the December Cabinet, where it would ordinarily go, was because we didn't get the details of the spending review until very late in November, which meant it was too late for the December Cabinet. Subsequent to that, we also had the local government settlement at the end of December, just before Christmas. So this business plan takes account of both the local government settlement and the announcements in the spending review. As colleagues will recall, Cabinet had already agreed a package of savings that we had been anticipating that we would have to make based on last year's MTFS. We'd put these savings forward because, to quote our former leader, we are a business-like council and we had been anticipating having to make those even before the pandemic. Unfortunately, following the announcements late last year, there does remain a gap in next year's budget. So we are being forced to present additional savings which are required due to the government's failure to recompense us for our activity to support our community in response to COVID. These savings are outlined at Appendix 3, and the quality impact assessments are at Appendix 4, and they'll be working their way through the various scrutiny panels over the next month or so before going to a new overview and scrutiny panel in mid-February. In addition to these additional savings, this business plan now also assumes that the council will levy the adult social care precept in addition to raising council tax by the maximum allowable rate without going through a referendum. This is not a decision that we've taken lightly, and it's not something that we would have hoped to be able to do had it been avoidable, because we know the impact the pandemic has had and indeed is still having on so many families across the borough. But ultimately, we are being forced into taking this precept and into raising council tax, and we will effectively be penalised if we do not by the way the government calculates their contributions to local authorities. It's also worth noting, Chair, that even with these additional savings, there remains a significant gap of nearly £6 million in 2022-23, rising to over £11.5 million in 2023-24, which is a significantly larger gap, certainly in the second year of the MTFS, than we've left in previous years. On a slightly separate matter, I wanted to draw colleagues' attention to the DSG figures, which are on page 17. As colleagues will recall, Cabinet previously agreed a policy where we would set aside 100% of the DSG deficit in 2020-21 and 50% thereafter. Due to the continued increase in demand that we're seeing, we are now having to put more money aside in order to continue to set aside these percentages, which is set out in Table 18. In 2021-22, for example, in order to continue to set aside 50%, we are now having to make over £14 million available, up from just over £9 million. The text above that table, at paragraph 5.4, makes clear that the government is yet to set out how the DSG deficits will be funded and ultimately provide local government with a solution, which is a problem that affects all local authorities across the country. Unfortunately, Chair, this is another area where the government is neglecting responsibility to address a national issue and resolve an issue that is really impacting our budget. We saw it with adult social care, where we're still waiting for the Green Paper nearly 4 years after it was first announced. We've seen it with COVID, where a promise to fully recompense local authorities to do whatever it takes has been broken. And we're seeing it with the DSG, where the government is putting forward no solution to what is ultimately a very large problem on our budget now. So it's really important, Chair, as I said when presenting the financial monitoring plan, that we continue the pressure on the government to fully recompense us for COVID, but also that we continue the pressure on the government to come up with a sustainable plan for the DSG deficit, which is really having such a detrimental impact on our budget. I'd just like to end by thanking Caroline Holland and her team again and commending this report to all colleagues. Thank you, or both reports, I should say, to all colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Byers. That's a really good and thorough introduction to the position of the council's finances at the moment and our plans for the future. And thank you for being so thorough. I know we've gone on quite a bit tonight because of the length of the discussions about climate change in particular. But I do appreciate the importance of this, as you know, and I echo your thanks to the relevant officers, in particular Roger Kershaw and Caroline Holland, who've been leading on this item. And Caroline is here tonight. And Caroline, I wondered whether you had anything further that you'd like to add to Councillor Byers' introduction.
Just a few things to add, Chair, after the very thorough introduction to these reports. To flag that with the financial monitoring report, whilst this is before the national lockdown and that will have an impact on both expenditure and income items, some of that income may be offset by a further sales fees and charges grant, but that clearly is still only 75% of some of our incomes. It does not include commercial income or sort of income from our industrial estates. So it's just to flag that there may be some further upside to offset some of the downside, but not all of it. And then just with regards to the business plan, wanted to flag that as a result of COVID and I think the impact on our businesses in London, we've decided that to not go ahead with the pool for 21-22. I think a decision that wasn't taken lightly, but I think with just the risks that's out there, particularly for some of the larger authorities, because I think one authority, their business rate income is larger than the whole income from Wales. So that shows you the scale of some of the monies that are then collected through the business rate pool. So it's with a heavy heart, I think we said that we will not continue it for next year, but we'll keep it under review. Other pools have been able to come in and out of having a pool, and we're committed to holding a shadow pool to see either how bad or do we make the right decision. So just to keep an eye on that. With regards to the DSG, clearly what we've put in here is currently that the worst case scenario. We've got some further meetings kicking off from Wednesday to have a look at what actions can be taken to look to mitigate some of that increase in the deficit. The statutory override is for 3 years only. So by the end of 22-23, we still currently have an estimated gap of 69 million. So I think the statutory override is to help authorities to get their deficit back into non-deficit. So unfortunately for us at this stage, we are not in that position, hence why we have set monies aside. But as I said, we will keep that under review as we go forward. We have shown some use of reserves in order to bring the budget gap down, both in 21-22 and in future years, and they have been set out on page 19 in the table there. So clearly, whilst we have an update to the MTFS, we are coming back in February with hopefully the final paper for you, and that will have an update then on the business rates in particular and the return that we have to do to government, setting out the impact on our collection fund. So whilst we show both in the monitoring report and in the business plan, the impact on Merton of the shortfall of council tax and business rates. Within our collection fund, we have to show the overall deficit and then show that our claims of either monies to or from central government, the GLA and ourselves. So certainly at this moment in time, with potential no further release indicated at this stage during 21-22, an increase in appeals for either offices or retail trying to challenge the level of their business rates, we are seeing major reductions in those levels of monies coming forward, and therefore we will look to bring the impact of that for you. So what I would say at this stage, these are the numbers. They will definitely change again by the time they come back to you in February, but hopefully we will be able to see what the impact that has. Clearly, draft equality assessments will be going round to I think the third round of scrutiny in order to then bring everything back to the Overview and Scrutiny Commission on the 17th of February. That will also be when we're holding our business rates consultation meeting. So it'd be interesting to see the impact clearly of COVID on our businesses and this budget on them as well. We are in the process of trying to pay out the grants that have been received both for close, lockdown, reopening, and that's been quite challenging as the various tiers that we've moved through and various restrictions have had an impact on the grants that we can pay and the pro-rating of those with colleagues from the Chamber of Commerce and Merton Voluntary MVSC to assist us with giving additional grants out to businesses. So we're working through that, but progress unfortunately is slow with the level of information still required to follow up on paying those grants. We also have a draft capital strategy and a draft treasury management strategy, and they will be finalised for the further report when it comes back to you in February. But it does have details of the current capital programme and the impact. So you can see there has been some benefits on the revenue side of reviewing our capital programme and what that then means for us going forward as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Caroline. Very impressive and thorough, as always. And as Councillor Byers said, please do extend our thanks to everyone involved in all the work that you've done. And I genuinely hope that you didn't have your calculator out watching telly with your turkey over Christmas. We also should just add, just as clarification, I'm sure that that when you were saying that we weren't taking part in the pool, we were really referring to the whole of London has really decided not to go with the pool again on this occasion. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a collective decision, and we've actually attached to Appendix 7 the letter revoking the pool for 21-22 for people to review.
Just wanted to make it clear that it wasn't just Merton stopping it for everybody. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, and thanks also for highlighting the work that that your team is doing to assist businesses at this time, and really welcome the work that they've done to get financial assistance to those who need it. We want Merton to be a great place for business, and the team is doing a great job at that. I had no other cabinet members who wish to speak. It's very thoroughly outlined here. It does seem a shame from what Councillor Byers has said that the government has still not funded for the full cost of COVID, and that as a result there are going to be COVID-related cuts to services and COVID-related increase in council tax, or COVID tax that's being introduced later this year, probably by most councils, because the government hasn't funded fully. I don't want to say too much more because I know that scrutiny is still considering the process at the moment and going through that, and we'll be listening to their views in the February meeting, which we look forward to, when we'll announce our recommendations as the final budget as well, having listened to them. So on that basis, is everybody happy with to move to the recommendations? So just need to scroll backwards. So recommendations for item 10, the business plan, are recommendations 1 to 3. Does everybody agree to those? No dissent, so they're agreed. And then on item 11, the financial monitoring report, the recommendations A and B. Does everybody agree to those? They're agreed as well. Thank you very much. So now what we'll do is we'll skip to agenda item 14, which is the contract extension variation of the financial management system. And I believe that once again, that's Councillor Byers. Do you have anything to say about it?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, this report relates to the financial information system that the Council holds with Advanced Business Software and Solutions Limited. The contract was signed in 2017 for an initial 4-year period with the option to extend for a further 2 years. And this paper recommends exercising that 2-year extension, as well as amending the contract to add the spend analysis module and business tax portal and extending it for a further 12 months. The initial implementation was both time intensive and costly, and the Council has been offered a discount for signing a 3-year extension. So as at this point in time, the Council lacks the capacity to undertake a re-procurement, the extension would allow sufficient time to properly prepare for a full re-procurement, as well as representing the best value option. I commend it to all colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Byers. I believe that the officer responsible was Roger Kershaw. Is Roger there, or Caroline, are you taking it on his behalf?
I'm taking it.
Did you have anything further that you wanted to add? Sorry.
I suppose just to add that we're also adding into the system the spend analysis, which will help with our category management plans for procurement purposes, and the business tax portal modules, which is where we have to do VAT digitally based come sort of 1st of April. So we've also sort of managed to incorporate that within the contract extension as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. I didn't have anyone else from Cabinet who had said that they wanted to speak. So are we happy to go to the recommendations, which are A and B? There's no dissent, so we'll take that as agreed. Thank you very much. Caroline, if you can pass on thanks to Roger as well and the rest of the team.
Thank you.
So then I think, if I'm not mistaken, that we've done all the business except for item 9 on the agenda, which is the one that that Councillor Byers needs to leave us at. Am I correct?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, all.
We move to item 9. And I'm terribly sorry, but is it Councillor Lanning that's the lead member on this? Councillor Lanning, would you like to introduce it for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues may recall that early last year we made a commitment to develop an integrated community services contract alongside our NHS and voluntary sector partners. We did so as we recognise that closer integration of services is not only a key part of national and local health policy, but it's also fundamental to delivering better care. I think COVID serves as no better example of why joined up services are so important. Although a lot of work was done last year to scope the service and also to engage the public, it had to pause in light of COVID, where resources had to be diverted to respond to the pandemic. So the recommendations in this report are therefore simple ones. It's to extend our 4 existing public health contracts, all of which are either on target or over target and due to expire between January and March of this year. And it's to extend them for 1 additional year or potentially up to 2 years, depending on how the situation with COVID proceeds this year. And that is so to extend them until we're able to proceed with our ambition for an integrated approach. Doing so will ensure that we can guarantee continuity of our mandated NHS health checks, children's community public health services, integrated health improvement service, and befriending for older people who are socially isolated, which is critical, particularly at this time. As such, I ask that Cabinet approve the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lanning. That's really interesting work, and thank you for your work on it. The lead officer on this item is Hannah Doody, the Director of Community and Housing. Hannah, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add, but here to take any questions.
Fantastic. That's the briefest one so far, so I appreciate that. Did anybody have anything? I didn't have any Cabinet members indicating that they wished to add anything, in which case thank you to Hannah and your team for the work that you've done on this, and to Councillor Lanning. Shall we move to recommendations A to D? Is everybody happy to accept them? Okay, I can't see any dissent, so we'll take those as approval. And I believe that I've reached the end of the agenda for tonight. Can I thank everybody for coming and for participating? It's quite a thorough meeting tonight with some really important issues raised, particularly around climate change and obviously the council's budget. So appreciate your time. Thank you very much and good night.